All right, Internet, welcome to Natas 31. So we are in extremely uncharted waters. I realized quickly that a lot of people, for some reason, didn't do 31 through 34. It must be new, or they just realized that it was Perl, and they thought, lame, I don't want to waste my time with Perl. So there is no Chris Dale, there is no John Hammond. There's very little written up tutorials on how to solve this. There's maybe 3 that I found, 2 of which are pretty obscure. But either way, we pushed through it and we solved the problem with their help, obviously. I do my best to explain what I did and what this attack is about, but like I said, we're in uncharted waters. So when we're prompted with Natas 31, we can see what we have here. We have basically a title that states that we're doing CSV to HTML. So there's some sort of conversion most likely happening in the back end. It's asking for us to upload something, and what it's looking for is CSV files, so that's what we like. But it isn't nicely rendered and sortable, table, much color, blah, 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 much cooler. So you upload something, and it comes back with a pretty table. So let's upload this, and you can see Purple Pickles comes up. I don't know if I have a file in here with much text to share with you. Yeah, ABC. So in reality, if I uploaded multiple values, you would see somewhat of a table here. So it would basically be, and I played with this earlier, so I know what it looks like. So you'd basically have a table here, right? And then it would have rows, and then columns, and then you have some values here. And it would be nicely sorted, and then when you actually push this little arrow here, it's going to then sort these based off of a hierarchy. I'm not sure what the hierarchy is, but it's sorting them. So we know that this is kind of what we're doing. So we're going to upload something. It's going to take that CSV file we provided it, and it's going to put into a nice pretty table for us. So now we need to figure out how to basically exploit this. So when we upload something, actually let's point this out again. If I upload this, you'll see that when I put in Purple Pickles, it actually also gives us a index.pl. So we know there's a Perl script in the back end. And also luckily we have source code here, which is nice. So that's what the application does. Now let's actually look at some of the solutions. And then once I've looked at that, then we'll actually dive into the answer. So some of the solutions I came across were, initially I stumbled across this solution here, which gives somewhat of an explanation of what's happening, but they skip over a lot of stuff and they don't really dive into much detail. They just talk about the minor adjustments that they've changed. And luckily there actually is a presentation that happened at Black Hat in 2016 that talks to this exact attack. So it seems to me that Over the Wire maybe have taken that attack and applied it to this challenge. But in this, basically this presentation, which I've brought up the deck here and also that's not the video, but that is a video that I'll explain. So let's do Perl Jam 2. Here you go. So basically this talk at Black Hat, Asia I think it was, in 2016, this guy basically talks through the attack and has a crazy number of memes in his presentation. So that was nice to know that that exists, and he kind of talks you through the real attack that he found, or the weaknesses in Perl. And that's what this initial answer referred to, which they talk through, but they don't talk to in depth. This answer here was somewhat insightful and useful, but they also skipped over a lot of stuff, and they just really provide the script. The best one is, once again, this blog here that, like I said, I can't pronounce her name, I'm sorry. But this individual here has actually written up some really good explanations talking through some of the stuff. And here they actually say they know nothing about Perl, so their explanation isn't the greatest, but it's somewhat useful. So I'm going off some strings and threads of how people understand this and trying to cobble it together for myself. So those are the solutions. I'm going to ignore most of them. And what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to walk you through this. So this presentation is sitting, and actually let me close this. Let me close some stuff so I'm not distracted. So here we have this presentation. So in this presentation, starting on slide 24, they actually talk you through a specific type of attack they've applied to a subset of code, which is very similar to the code we're looking at in our source code. So this is the source code that we care about because this is the actual Perl script. Everything else is just HTML fluff around the ends. And what I'll do here is I'm going to walk you through the weaknesses in the code, what we're trying to exploit, and then bounce back and forth between some resources that I found useful. So I'm going to pull this out as its own browser, and I'm then going to basically switch back to this slide here, and we're going to bounce back and forth between the two, so I can hopefully explain this in a digestible way. So, first things first, they talk through a series of weaknesses in Perl, and at the end of his conclusion in his presentation, he basically says, stop using Perl and go somewhere else. And that's a little harsh, but that's what he stated. And the big thing here, and I'll talk you through each of these. So basically he starts out with stating that in the code that we have, and actually let me scroll up, he has a snippet of code here. So this is a program that he pulled out from somewhere. And basically the program takes a file, iterates through that file, and then prints out whatever is in the file. That's what it's doing here. And that's what our file is doing as well. Or that's what our script is doing in the challenge. So you can see in this code snippet here, it's going to basically state if you've uploaded a file and it exists, then I want you to take that file and put it in this param method, and then shove it into this variable. Once it's in this variable, then I want you to iterate over this variable and then print out what's inside of it, which is going to be all the stuff within inside the file. That's the same thing we're doing on our end, where if we look on our side, we're basically saying, I want you to upload a file here. And then once you've uploaded that file, I want you to take it and put it inside of this param variable, and then into this file scalar. I think it's called a scalar variable inside of this location here. And once it's inside this location, then I want you to actually iterate over this with a while loop, and then I want you to print out all the elements inside of it. And you can see they're doing some fancy stuff here of basically adjusting the CSV into a table format for HTML. And the reason we can see that is we can see that they're splitting by the comma, so CSVs are comma separated values. And it's basically going to take that, pull that out, and then it's going to basically iterate through that and put it into a table format here. And that's what's occurring between basically this if and else here. And once we've realized this, we can basically read through this presentation and understand how they've basically figured out a way to manipulate this and find the weakness in the Perl code. So let's go back to what he was stating here. So the first point made here is that inside of the upload method, this is supposed to take a file. You're supposed to upload a file here. But in reality, you can see that he states down here that it's checking for if one of the values provided is a file, but not all of them have to be. And that's the emphasis here. So when uploading something to the upload method, you can have multiple values in here, but just one of those have to be a file. So we can have something prior to this file that is actually maybe a string, right? And down here you can see uploading a file and assigning a scalar to the same parameter will work. So when it says assigning it to the scalar, I think in Perl scalar variables are a thing. I did some research and it seemed like that was the case. So our scalar variable and the thing that we're assigning it to, I'm pretty sure it's going to be this file here. So we're going to upload multiple values here. When we upload the multiple values, then we're going to actually shove them into this file. And this file is going to have multiple values. So it's going to have a string that we've input that's going to be malicious. And then in addition to that, it's also going to have the regular file that we were supposed to upload, which is a normal file it expects. But since we put this first, that's what it's going to first actually take action on and look at. So that's the first weakness that we found here is the upload piece. If we go down a bit further, then he's going to dive into the param piece. Then that's what we're going to jump into here. So the next piece he talks to is that with the param value, he really kind of breaks down what I've just talked to with the param piece. So he basically talks that when you upload a file into the param location, it returns a list of all the parameter values. So there's a list here, right? And it's returning everything. But the important point to point out here is that only the first value is what's inserted inside of this variable here. So this is our variable, and that's the first value is what's inserted. So if we actually put our string in there instead of the file, then that's what the file is now going to be associated with. And that's basically what the conclusion he makes here. And if we keep going a bit further, you can see that he's referring to the while piece now. So you can see that we have our while loop here. So we have, here is the first weakness, here is the second weakness, and then here is going to be our third weakness. Now, what he's talking to at this point in time is actually the sideways greater than less than piece right here. And these greater than less than around the file, it usually doesn't allow you to work with strings. It usually only takes a file in itself. But apparently, there is a system, I think it's a system call. When I looked at basically a series of resources that talk to argv and what it is, and it actually ingests commands. So when you put argv as a string inside of this location for the file, it's actually going to let you, it's going to basically change that while loop or that kind of file variable into a series of open calls. So you can see that basically it states that it loops through the arg values, and when it loops the arg values, it's inserting each one into an open call. Now, if you're putting it inside of an open call and you've added argv, that means that the argv is associated to commands. So that's going to be like, ls, cat, etc. So instead of uploading a file content to here, we're now going to display any content any while we'd like. And it then executes the code, and I think in the next file he explains why that's the case. Yeah, so here we go. So in here he talks through when you upload that, when uploading the argv, when adding your Python, your code there, so you can see here, this is the code that we're going to add at the end of our URL, and then we're gonna add a pipe at the end of that. And the reason being is that when you add a pipe at the end of the command, within basically an open method, that method then begins to execute and act as an execute call instead of an open call. So that is actually allowing us to actually execute the file, and we can execute code that we want on the server and get our answers back. So I've talked you through some of the code here. Here's some more details around what we're going to actually specifically change. But in a nutshell, that's kind of the review of the code. I'll quickly talk to this. So I'll explain what this looks like in like a zap file or a zap kind of setup. But here we're going to upload our file, which is going to be ingested in this piece here. But this is the second, right? And then this is going to be the first thing that's understood. So, and that's really coming back to the param piece. Remember how I said if you put multiple files in there, the first one's going to be ingested and the second's going to be ignored? The first is going to be our string. And that string we're going to input there is actually going to be this one here, and that's going to be our argv. And the reason we're going to put the argv in there is because the argv is going to be then piped into this while loop for the file variable. And that variable, like I said previously, instead of being considered as a file, it's going to be considered as an open method here. And then that open method, when we have the argv in there and we add the pipe to the end of our command in the URL, that open method is then going to actually act like an exec method here, and it's going to execute any command we put in here. And for this specific use case, he put ipconfig just to do a simple kind of terminal test. So this is the first thing we're uploading, and it's going to be a basic argv string. And then the next thing is going to be our basic a regular file content, what's expected of us to upload there. But remember, this is going to be ignored, and this is what's actually going to occur, and we're going to look at this. So that's kind of what's happening there. I'm going to show you some resources that helped me understand a lot of what I just explained to you. So first things first is argv. Had no idea what it was. This video is semi-useful. There's not many views. I found it through DuckDuckGo, so just type in argv Perl and you'll find it. He actually explains argv pretty well. Another thing around argv was here. So this article right here actually talks to argv and Perl as well, and they basically explain the fact that argv holds values for command line. That's the purpose of it. And it's something that you can actually use to execute commands, and that's the reason why we're putting argv in our string. Some other things that were useful for me to understand what was happening here was actually the CGI piece, because in the beginning of this presentation you'll see that he references the CGI, and I didn't know what CGI was, so I actually came to this article and explained what it was. And at a high level, basically, CGI is a way for, so let's take a step back. So when you're browsing the web, there's basically a simple thing where you go to a URL, right? So let's go here. So I'm a user, and then I go to URL. So say I go to Google, or not Google, that's a bad example. You go to some website. So we'll go to URL, right? And that URL is pointing to a server, and that server has some sort of file that you want to see. So when you go to that URL, that server is then going to basically find the file. So it finds, F1, the file. And then what that's going to do is it's going to come back to you through the internet, the magical internet, and it's going to present back to you whatever you're searching for. So that's going to present back file 1, what we're looking for. So that's one way that the internet kind of functions. But with CGI, which is it's called Common Gateway Interface. It's a Perl specific thing. This is basically a way for us to have a script execute on the server side and then present back the output. So instead of me directly going to a URL and getting a specific file, I'm actually going to have the server here, right? And then I'm going to have a script, we'll say SR for script, here. And then we're going to go to the URL, so we have our URL here. So we're going to go to this, and that's going to then go to our server. That server is then going to come to this script. This script is then going to execute. Once it executes, it's going to have a output. So there's some sort of output from that script when it was executed. That output is then presented back to us. So instead of grabbing a direct file, we're actually going to get the output of a script that executed from the server that we originally went to. And that's the kind of the whole premise of CGI. And that script that's executing, I'm assuming there's some part here where when we put our argv in and we adjust the commands and things like that, we're actually executing a script here. So our malicious script we've uploaded via the URL, that's going to then bring back our output, and that output's going to be us catting out the password for the next challenge. So that's kind of what CGI is. I didn't know what it was, but I thought it was kind of insightful and useful to know that, especially when looking through these different types of snippets of code. Okay, so we explained that. These are the solutions. There's nothing here I want to show you. Close that. Okay, and then another thing I actually wanted to point out here, file descriptors. So I didn't really know what that was because in here they mention file descriptors quite a few times. So if you do file D, yeah, you can see they mention file descriptors many different times throughout this presentation. And the specific use case in this problem he mentions is that the variable will be assigned to our scalar value instead of the uploaded file descriptor. So in here, a file descriptor is basically a value that's pointing to a open file. And the explanation that best helped me understand this was probably this screen here, where basically when you open a file, it's gonna associate that file to a specific file descriptor. So it's a simple number, right? And that simple number that is pointing to then that file that you've wanted to access, and it's going to tell you basically the permissions of that. So is it read only, write only, etc. And then there's some other funky stuff here that I'm not 100% sure on. So that was actually insightful to know as well. Having this insight to this stuff might not seem directly applicable to solving the problem, but it is directly applicable to understanding the problem and what's happening behind the scenes. So that was actually useful to understand here, because what it's stating here is that with our file variable, instead of assigning it to the file descriptor, which could be 0 through whatever, random number, that random number is pointing to the file that we uploaded. But remember that that file we uploaded is the second value, right? It's not the first value. So it's supposed to be pointing to the file descriptor that describes the file we uploaded. So that could be, 3 or whatever it is. But instead of doing that, it's actually assigning it to the scalar value instead that we provided, which is here. And that scalar value, remember, is going to be a string, and that string is going to be argv. So he's talking in gobbledygook right now, but when you break down the sentences, break down the terminology, it's useful to understand. All right, with all that being said, what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to show you the solution to the problem. There's 2 ways of solving this, one of which I figured out, one of which I couldn't. So one, you can do a simple solution to what this individual, was it this guy? No, somebody else basically put together a command, and it's a really lengthy command, and I broke the command down in Sublime to kind of walk you through what they're doing here. But I think another way of explaining it, and a simpler way, would be actually showing you through Zap. So in Zap, what we have here is I've done a post request, and the post request I've done, let me open the correct one. So I don't have it open. But the post request I did here, let me go back here to show you the initial one. All right, so here we go. Here's the original post request. So here you can see in this post request, we did a post, and in that post, we basically uploaded a file. That uploaded file is untitled spreadsheet, etc., etc. And then in the file is a simple value of ABC123. So that's what's being uploaded here. Now, when we send this, if I send this now, you'll see basically in HTML, it's going to print out ABC123. And that's what we've seen historically when we looked at the other page. So in here, when we uploaded this file here, you see we got ABC123 back. So that's what you're seeing here. Now the trick here, and it's stated in the presentation as well, really, really nicely. So if I go to the very end of this, you can see when uploading this via Zap or some other method, either in a curl statement, there's a few things you want to add. First, you want to add your malicious command at the end of the URL. The next thing after adding your malicious command is you actually want to add an additional section, which is your evil section. So this is the first value that needs to be interpreted when it goes into the upload area, and this is the second one that's expected. So you want to insert this section, which is going to basically include some header content, and then it's going to include your string, and then you have whatever you've uploaded historically. So what we need to do is we need to add our malicious command, and we also need to add our first section here below, before the file itself. So to do that, you can, we'll just grab one from someone else. So this is the curl statement. But actually what I'll do is I'll just break it down here for you. So I'll copy this here. I'll put it in there so we have a second section. Next thing is we want to add argv. And we want to change this to plain text instead of a CSV file. And then if you actually look at the presentation, you'll see that the CSV is gone here because we're not putting that in. And we just have this piece here. So we've added our first section here. Now the next thing is actually adding our malicious command up here. And our malicious command I have broken down here. I've copied it. But I'll actually walk you through what's happening here and what it is. And before I do that, let me grab and change the colors. Cool. So if we look at this command, it's broken out into a few different sections. So, what was that? So if we look at this, we can have our command, right? We have a cat, we have a %20, which is a space in URL encoding. We want to basically cat out the password that's inside of this path for the next level. We have another space here. And then we have a %7c. So what this is actually a pipe. And the reason we have a pipe at the end of our command is actually if you look inside of this explanation, near the end they talk about the importance of adding the pipe. And I've already talked through this and what it is and why we're doing it. But I'll just re-emphasize it here is that the reason we're actually adding a pipe is to change the behavior of our open method to adjust it to a more of an exec method. So we're going to add that pipe there. So once we've added the pipe and we have our command, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it into Zap here. So we'll do question mark for the command. We'll add in our suspicious stuff, and I put 2 question marks in there, so we'll remove one. And then we'll send this. So once you send it, you realize that it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Well, I don't know. So I couldn't figure out why it didn't work, and that is exactly why we did a curl statement instead. So this is the lengthy curl statement that is from one of the other solutions, and they've done a lot of what we've done. They've just packaged it all into a massive curl statement. So you can see up here, let's actually change the coloring one more time. Let me grab this. So in our curl statement here, you can see they're going to do some basic authorizations. So they're going to authorize us into the correct, Natas 31. Then we're going to put our content in. So the content type, what kind of content it is, it's going to be a multi-part upload. Here you can see the plain text piece that I mentioned. So we're putting in our argv, which is the important piece, is the first piece. And then the next piece is uploading our file. So we can see down here, they just have 3 T's CSV. And we're uploading a file of 1, 2, 3. And then once we've uploaded that, below that you can see that there's basically an upload command that's going to do the upload piece, which is similar to ours. And then below here you can see their specific malicious URL at the very end of this long curl statement, which is sitting here. So we have the space, the URL encoded, we have the pipe, and we have another space, and then we're catting out the password for the next level. So if I come into my terminal here and I run that code, and you can see that this is basically the curl command all smashed together. That's why I broke it out there so I could explain it better. If we do enter here, you can see that it basically prints out everything, and then at the very bottom you can see that it's sorted our table and it's given us our password directly out. So because we printed out the password from that specific location, or catted it out. So internet, with that being said, that is the solution and the problem breakdown for Natas 31, and we will go to Natas 32 soon. See you around.